Hello, my name is Michael Waite. I work as a researcher at Kaldor Public Art Projects in Sydney. In 1976, John Kaldor invited Namjoon Paik and Charlotte Moorman to visit Australia to create Kaldor Art Project No. 5. In 2019, I met and interviewed the three men I'll be talking to today. That is Graham Hallett, Peter Hardy, and Richard Maude. About the time they spent observing and working with Paik and Moorman, both during and after this visit to Australia. Hearing them speak about their experiences provides us with valuable insights into the working methods and collaborative art practice of Namjoon Paik and Charlotte Moorman. For question one, I should also mention that all of the archival material relating to this project, and in fact all Kaldor Public Art Projects since 1969, has been digitised and is publicly available on our website. One of the items we have is a collective letter written by a group of Sydney art students comprising Graham, Richard and Peter, who I'm talking to today, a few weeks before the arrival of Paik and Moorman in March 1976, expressing interest in meeting them. Quoting from this letter, they say that they wanted to use video cameras to document the visit of Paik and Moorman by creating a situation of non-conventional exchanges of information.
It was in my second year in the art school, 76, 75 was the beginning of Alexander Mackie. And Alexander Mackie itself, of course, was a brand new style of art school in Australia at this stage. It had abundant money to do basically what it wanted. And at this stage in Sydney, or in Australia, we had a new government with the Whitlam Labor government coming in with plenty of money. They'd just bought Blue Poles. I think the Sydney Opera House had just opened. It was a really big creative energy in Australia at this stage. I had taken on new studies, unusual for art school. We had electromedia, we had kind of sound, and these sort of structures were coming in with contemporary art studies, like looking at Joseph Beuys and people like this. So it was a whole new wave of thinking and lateral thinking, I would imagine, coming through into this art school, which was not apparent in other art schools in Australia at this time. So basically that is the sort of background. Walking into the art school itself, you were self-directed, you had set up basically your own gigs. And I loved working in sound for a while there, which was when I got involved with this, was the electromedia department run by John Cruz, who was an ex-rock band person who also had a serious interest in music and particularly electronic music like Kraftwerks and things like that. So we had that sort of going on. And it was just a natural thing to hear of Paik and Moorman arriving and getting involved with them in this contemporary style. There was also new things happening in the New South Wales Art Gallery that were amazing. So we sat down, we worked out the letter, and it got sent, and there we are. And then the response came, and it was just brilliant. So for me, it was such a fantastic sort of energy in the school, and to have Paik and Moorman arrive was just an extraordinary event that started a whole new chain of circumstances.
And so just on the context of Alexander Mackie, we had free education, free tertiary education. Richard or Graham, did you want to add anything about just Alexander Mackie College in general, what it was like being there in the 70s?
Well, for me, it was a real eye-opener. I had not long left school. I was a young fella and living in the suburbs, and then suddenly I found myself plonked in the middle of Sydney, and also the diversity of the people who were in the course, very mixed age groups, more mature people and young people who'd been around, and it was just that was as much an education for me as the learning of starting to learn about more about art in itself, was the interchange of the personalities.
Well, just following on what both Graham and Peter were saying, I'd just like to emphasise that it was a time of great optimism in Australian society generally, and most particularly in the arts. It was seen as a golden age. It's still, for many people, it was a great golden age of new Australian cinema, of literature, and the arts generally. And the development and the opening of the new art school in 1975 under a very new scheme of a system of tertiary education, somewhere between the traditional college education and university. It was they were called colleges of advanced education. They were very well resourced, and we entered this as the first intake of students in 1975, and we had all this new equipment and different types of classes were being offered: sound, video, film, performance, etc., as well as traditional mediums of drawing, sculpture, etc., etc. So it was an amazing time to step into this. We were very lucky. Yeah, I'm just on that point. I'm not sure if we actually received a formal reply, quite possibly, I don't recall it, but I do recall we were very nervous, of course, and we were, not particularly skilled, and video was new to us. We did turn up at the press conference early, just to stake our claim for space and to set up and shuffle around nervously. The letter was aiming high, and we had no idea what kind of response we were going to get. We certainly did not expect the response that we did get from Charlotte when, after the conference, we introduced ourselves, and in essence she said something like, "Yes, we love you guys, come and join us." I mean, and as we got to know Charlotte and Paik, of course, this was very much who she was and very much who Paik was. They were collaborators. They were welcoming, and the conference itself, I think the media asked a whole bunch of really silly questions, as you can imagine. But she was a professional. She'd seen it all before. Her responses were just, lovely and inviting and intriguing. She did do a performance, as I recall. I think it was TV Bra for Living Sculpture, which is pretty shocking for a standard media a journalist or somebody covering that if you've never seen anything like that before. But because she was such a warm, open person, I think the response generally in that room that day was really very positive.
Yeah, well, very much. And one example was when Paik was going to do his one for violin, which I think he's done a lot. It's basically breaking a violin. So there was Paik. He had sort of a bench or a desk or something, and he was holding the violin by its neck, a few feet above the desk, and the audience was there. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen, although we assumed he was going to smash his violin. But time passed and there was great anticipation, and then the tension in the room sort of built, and there was this sort of palpable bit of concern, really, and it was quite tense. It was, when would you break this violin? And when do you break a violin? And so there he was, poised, not moving, waiting, we're waiting. And then off the stage, as it were, Charlotte, whether to encourage him or to interrupt him or just to say something, she started to speak, but barely had her mouth opened when he brought the violin down, smashing it to pieces. And it was this sort of fusion of concentration and interruption which created the perfect moment whereby it was an unrepeatable thing and worked perfectly. Yes, it was a great evening. A few of us went along and we were going to see Cage's performance. No idea what he was going to do. And when we arrived outside the theatre, Charlotte was setting up to do the ice cello piece. It was a very, very, very cold night, and they'd set up a small podium and she was sitting herself on that. She was basically naked, except for some flowers in her hair and some sort of flowers around her body. And they presented her with what was meant to be the ice cello, but it was more the size of a double bass and not very elegant, and basically an enormous iceberg sort of a thing with a rough instrument shape. And she had a perspex bow, which she was going to play it with until it melted. Anyway, we left poor Charlotte there and went inside to see Cage, and it was a long show, and he did 4 pieces as I recall. There were 2 piano pieces and 2 spoken pieces. They were all each about 40 minutes long. The spoken pieces were just sounds, guttural sounds and other things, no words. And that went on. And then he would do a piano piece, which was basically playing one note at a time, holding it until the sustain evaporated. And then he might play another note. And then, of course, this was followed by another 40-minute piece of no words. And at this stage, the audience was growing pretty shifty. People were leaving in droves. There was noise as they left. Nothing perturbed him. At one point, they had a little slideshow in the background with some sort of calligraphic drawings, and one was like a smile, and the lady we were with started laughing, and we started laughing, and then we were all laughing out loud, which was very audible in the theatre as people left, and he's playing a note. And suffice to say, it went for a couple of hours to mixed reviews and success. We left the theatre, came outside, and the bitter wind was blowing, and it was cold, and poor Charlotte was suffering. By this stage, not so much playing the ice cello as chipping away at it with the rod, and she persisted, and eventually, I think some hours later, it did melt.
I'll also say, just on that performance of Charlotte's, there was a pickup, an audio sound, I think, on the bass of the ice cello, so that her movements to her bowing and chipping away, and that was actually amplified, and the dripping of the ice as it melted. So it was a sound work as well. It just went on for a lot longer than I think she'd anticipated.
Yeah, with the cello, to just her absolute dedication, really, and perseverance in very difficult circumstances, where I think many other people would have postponed, given up, or gone away. But she believed that strongly.
Yeah, and according to an article from an Adelaide newspaper at that time, it took 3 hours for that ice cello to completely melt. And Charlotte actually spoke about it as being a beautiful, profound piece that shows the impermanence of things.
I remember there was no occupational health and safety regulations, and I think, I do recall that. But when you're young, I mean, you want to be involved, and it was great to be allowed to There was some reluctance, as I recall, from the art gallery or one of the art gallery curators, but we were eventually allowed up with our cameras. I think maybe Charlotte just talked them into it as well. She was good at that. So we took up porta packs and we helped, I do recall at one stage holding the harness while, I don't know, somebody else went and grabbed something, etc. I mean, she really was. It was, I think it was actually even a bit of a windy day. And there was a very big crowd gathered, you know, I suppose waiting for something to happen. And apart from Charlotte sitting there with a pole and a cello, not a great deal happened. But it was great being up there, being part of it. And, you know, I'm assuming that we got some good video.
I'd throw in my supplementary question would be, you know, these days we'd go over there with our little iPhone and just hold it in one hand and get great video. And it is funny, isn't it? You know, we look back and, I mean, cutting edge technology at the time, it's a bit humorous these days how cumbersome it was, where you actually had, it was almost like a huge suitcase hanging over your shoulder. So what were these cameras? Who made them? What was the technology?
There were Sony cameras. I don't know about the history of that, of consumer video, but they must have been incredibly expensive. They were only just portable, as you were saying, you know, as Graham mentioned. They were incredibly heavy, you know, I mean, they were solid state pieces of electronic equipment. You really had to, depending on whether you were left or right-handed, you would have the porta pack slung over that shoulder, because then there was a good chance of it not slipping off. But it's a terrifying thought to think that we were walking around these little ledges up on the art gallery roof and around the portico with this big machine and the inability to balance or hold on to anything, because you really had to use both of your hands and yeah, kind of lean in. That's right. Well, another extraordinary work, presentation by Charlotte. I'd forgotten completely what the work was called, and because we always referred to it, and I think perhaps even Charlotte did as well, as chocolate cello was an easy way to refer to it. Charlotte travelled always with two cellos. There was her good concert one, and there was another one for performances such as this, you know, for where, you know, if any damage was sustained, it could be handled. Her cello and her bow were covered with glad wrap, then completely covered with chocolate. She was naked and then completely covered with chocolate. This wasn't during the performance. It was a tableau piece which lasted an hour. I can't remember where. My recollection was that actually nothing happened. It was a tableau piece. She was surrounded, as you said, by I think you said by Easter bunnies and Easter eggs and things like that. It was a tableau piece, and it was a still performance. You know. But my particular memory was when she finished the piece, she went to the back rooms at the gallery, and she needed to shower, get all the chocolate off it, which she started doing. And I was videoing, of course, because we videoed basically everything. And she was chatting away, and a friend of hers from New York, I think, I wish I could remember who it was, but it was somebody who had a substantial reputation as a choreographer or composer or something like that, a woman who was coming up to see Charlotte backstage, if you like, and was trying to arrange a meeting between them later, you know, in the forthcoming days. But I was kind of in the way, shooting, and this person, in frustration, I think, and some dismay, just said something like, "Charlotte, are you ever not performing?" Because I was videotaping it. And of course, Charlotte wasn't, in a way, you know, she was always interacting, and whether it was a formal performance or not, she was engaged with whoever was there. That is my strongest memory. And again, that must be great video wherever it is these days.
I guess when you're coated in chocolate, it's a bit hard to tell where the performance begins and ends, isn't it?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I think in some ways, and I'm not actually sure what the relationship was, but they'd obviously made quite a number of friends from the college, both us as students, but also in the administration, and other teachers, etc., in some of the different classes. But both Charlotte and Paik were always happy to talk with people in any situation, really. I mean, they liked to interact. They were both very hardworking. From everything I saw, they were very dedicated to their practice and also to the collaborative process. I do recall that one of our senior lecturers presented a slideshow of student work, mostly from the previous year, where the dean had actually organised an exhibition of student work, the new art school at the Opera House. So it was a bit of a splash. Anyway, I produced a piece which was documented and which was shown at this slideshow. I produced an installation piece which had a performative element. So there was a series of slides, and had gotten to know Charlotte already by now. And I was so chuffed that she complimented this little bit of documentation. I was 22 or something, and to have Charlotte see some of my work and respond so positively was, really it felt good. And was certainly very encouraging. As I said before, there were many different medium-based classes. There was sound, video, as well, electromedia generally, performance classes. There was, I think actually with the sound classes that Paik would have dropped into that and spoken to students, and, they were around, they were around talking to people and being encouraging, talking about their own work, their own processes. The people they had collaborated with, like talked about Boyce, Cage, etc. It was. I wasn't around all the time because I think we were getting close to the next stage of our journey with them, which was to the Solomon Islands, and we were running around trying to get the resources, trying to find the money basically to and organise the equipment to go to the Solomons with them. That actually didn't happen until the very last minute, but I know that Charlotte did some performances at the art school as well as chatting with students, etc. Yeah, it was fantastic to have people of that, artists of that calibre and dedication, and just wandering around chatting to students, talking about work.
Yeah, I do. It was basically a lot of the lecturers had become very involved with Paik and Moorman over the week. So they'd been asked to hold the balloons down, and there were ropes put onto the balloons at the Opera House. But when we went there, it was a beautiful sunny day, gentle breeze, and everyone standing around holding these ropes reasonably loosely. There was a bit of weather. And then suddenly there was a gust, and we were lifted, the lecturers were lifted up. I had to run in and grab hold of one of the ropes to tie it down. Otherwise, I probably would have ended up going over the harbour bridge. It was like such a shock, instant lift that came from nowhere. Nobody expected it, It was extraordinary. But managed to get a lash down and she didn't take off. There you go. So, but that was basically an in-house thing for Alexander Mackie, yeah. But it's a very big crowd there. And I think Richard was filming it from the steps, if I remember.
Yeah. Again, I had a porta pack and we filmed the whole thing, or videotaped the whole thing. Probably took some stills, etc. as well.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I'll mention too, in our archive, there's a letter of permission from whoever the authority for Moore Park was, giving permission for Charlotte to do it there. So it seems before it happened at the Opera House, they were trying to do it in Moore Park. And there's even in the archives some quotes from helicopter companies of how much to hire a helicopter for an hour or two. So I don't know if somebody thought they were going to film from a helicopter. There's no context to it. But it's often interesting when you just go, oh, this thing just happened at the Opera House. But in fact, sometimes that was the second or the third draft for it to happen.
I'm so glad it happened. What an amazing backdrop to a piece like that. I will add that it was a big crowd. I mean, some of them would have been just milling, a beautiful day. A lot of them would have been milling around the Opera House just because it's the Opera House. But for whatever reason, I mean, there were big, I mean, the photos that you have in the archive attest to that. There was a very big crowd, and there was Charlotte interacting, chatting to people getting sort of photos taken with her when she came down or before she took off. It was a visual spectacular, and she had a big cape on, I recall, and a kind of some headgear that was sort of shaped like the Opera House shells.
Yeah.
We were young and green, and we arrived in this extraordinary place. It's a tropical island. The beauty of it was a knockout. It was a culture shock as well, and we were greeted by Charlotte, I recall, and Charlotte's husband. We were there to work, and we wanted to do what we could do, and I guess there's sort of. We wanted to be voyeurs on their working process. I mean, Paik had the project agenda, Guadalcanal Requiem, to produce. So he had an idea of what he wanted to do. So our interaction with them was slightly different. So we were there to observe their working relationship, how he produced his ideas, etc., etc. But we were always there to help out as well. I mean, we got a couple of times we got stuck in rivers, in a four-wheel drive, and I mean there's lots of little things like that. Get a shot from a different angle at the same time, or as he had set his shots up, things like that. We pretty much every evening we were there. We had dinner or drinks, and we would talk about the next what was on the agenda for the next day. Were we going out to a village to meet somebody, or setting up on one of the beaches amongst the leftover of the Second World War, old landing craft that was blown up, or we found live shells on the beach still.
And Graham, I know you've told me some pretty interesting stories about ways you observed Paik at work on the Solomons.
Everything was interesting. I can think of a few. One day we went up on a very, very high hill, and you could see all the countryside surrounding us. Beautiful day down in the valley. You could hear the voices of children singing, possibly from a school. And on the top of the hill there was a clearing, and there was a mound of what I think were sort of funeral markers, grave markers or funeral sticks from the Japanese people who had been killed, and they all had calligraphy on them, and there were hundreds of them in this pile. And I picked one up and showed it to Paik, and I said, with the calligraphy, I said, "What is this? Is this a name?" And he said, "It's the unknown soldier." And when I turned around, he'd taken his camera, and he was shooting up into the sky, and he was wheeling around and sort of dipping and diving and doing figure eights, and I wasn't sure what he was doing, but it occurred to me perhaps later on that he was mimicking like a fighter airplanes, a dogfight, which would get incorporated into the Requiem piece. Yes. And one evening we'd been out to dinner at a place near on the ocean, pretty much, and we had some dinner, and we ordered a lot of different dishes, and we had some wine or beer or something. But Paik insisted that the main course was the rice, and he had Coca-Cola. But prior to that, as the sun was going down, he took a dip in the ocean. He appeared in a pair of shorts and he had a band around his waist, I believe, which he used to wear a lot. I guess, I don't know, to keep his organs warm or something, although I don't know what good that did him in the water. But he sort of got into the edge of the water. There was no surf. There was just the little waves lapping up against the sand, the beautiful palm trees and the whole thing. But he was just lying on his back, getting bobbed back and forth against the beach, and he was just laughing and laughing and laughing. And Charlotte was standing on the beach, and she said, well, I never thought I'd see anything like this. But there he was, just lying on his back, looking up at the sky, getting bounced against the ocean. And he was just like a child, a happy child.
I'd have to say it was the most extraordinarily creative aspect I've ever had in my life. And still to this day, I'm working with a lot of canons, in other words, that he put out. His fluidity. Mark Huey wasn't an easy guy to work with because his language, I couldn't understand him half the time. And then suddenly there would be this superb clarity, and it was either you were hearing something, I can't explain, but you sort of certainly got an incredible engagement with him. One of the experiences, though, I did a lot of meditation, always have, and we were walking into the doorway through the foyer into the mandala, and he'd written all these notes about what was going to happen when we moved into the Mandana Hotel, it was. And he just tore them all up and threw them in the bin. And I sort of gaped at him and I said, you've just spent sort of 2 hours writing up this stuff. And he said, yes, now we'll see what's really going to happen. And we strolled in, and I think there were all of us there. But what had happened was the Japanese War Grave Commission had arrived that morning. It was a Sunday morning, and already there were a group of American generals and brigadiers that had fought on the ground in the Guadalcanal campaigns, and they were all there too. And he decided instantly out of the blue to put them together at this long table, and he set it up so by the time we'd just arrived, basically, we were at work in the afternoon on Sunday afternoon. There it was, and Richard, I think, was filming it, and they put out big tablecloths, which I've got one still, believe it or not. They threw them out, these big paper design things, and that left me with a sort of a way of working for me personally, where I suddenly began to realise that maybe there was something Zen in all this, because this is a Zen procedure. You just move out into the moment and debunk all the plans, And this is how he worked most of the time. It was working in the moment, but always with a pre-plan that seemed to get dumped, It was just extraordinary, And it was an easy way, an easy flow, no fluster, you just deal with things as they happen. And so that was an extraordinary event for me. And I still use that in making assemblage and making the art I make now.
Richard, I should also mention, as well as spending time with Paik and Moorman in 1976, the following year, 1977, John Kaldor for Project 6 brought out Sol LeWitt to do wall drawings on the interior walls of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, for which you and some other art students from Alexander Mackie participated in that. And then later in the year, Richard Long, Stone Line in the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Again, we were talking before about the 70s and what an extraordinary time it was, what was happening in art then, how well Alexander Mackie fitted into that, and you students being there, being open to these ideas and these processes. So again, how are you looking back on say, spending time with Paik and Moorman in particular, and just that time in general?
First up, we were very lucky in some ways because we were in the right place at the right time in terms of an institution that valued self-directed learning, that was very well resourced, and with an intake of students that had the initiative to learn how to use these new resources and to want to go beyond the walls of the art school to interact with artists that had a well-established practice. I mean, it's really hard. You don't know it when you're inside it, but I've had many times to reflect over the years and how much, particularly Moorman and Paik, I got to say, because we spent so much time with them in so many different situations, and their work is so varied as well, and drawing in all these other people from all over the world in terms of presenting their compositions or something like that, but also the sort of discourse that was around them. I think we were very lucky, and it certainly has had an enormous effect on my life generally, but certainly on the way I see art. It was very expansive. It was pretty much. It made me realise that anything could be a medium, and that you, as Peter was saying, I mean, you do as much organisation as you can possibly do to achieve some goal of an idea or to follow some process, but ultimately, when you're making the work, you can actually just throw it out or lose it or whatever, and still make the work. That kind of attitude, I think, is fantastic, especially in an age when, from day one at art school, so many students seem to start constructing their CV and the rest of their careers. The fluidity that we were offered, that we sought, and then in a very naive way, and then was so generously offered by Moorman and Paik, and subsequently Sol LeWitt. I mean, he was a dream. He was a wonderful person to work with. Richard Long, down to earth, just a down to earth guy from Brixton, who made extraordinary stuff, did extraordinary things, did long walks. Anyway. Right place, right time, savvy enough, a little bit savvy enough to see some opportunities coming our way and going, well, what's to stop us? Let's go for it. And, an art school that let us do it.
And of course, it's great that I also think you guys had the initiative to go and put yourselves out there and to take these opportunities.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that letter, when I read it back, I think, my God, we didn't have a clue what we're talking about, really. I mean,
we might have. We might have.
But, it worked anyway, didn't it? We had no idea of the kind of experience we were about to have. We thought we were just going to shoot a bit of video and, learn a bit and meet somebody, and it turned out to be this amazing month or so of incredible influence on our lives.
Well, I guess in a way that's an echo of what Paik would say. You make your plans and then you find out what's really going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so that's our 10 questions. I just want to thank everybody. Graham Hallett, Peter Hardy, Richard Maude. Thank you so much for spending time with us, sharing your memories. As I said, I just think it gives us such a great insight into Namjoon Paik and Charlotte Moorman and how they work together from you having so closely observed them.
That's wonderful. And thank you too, Michael.